So we'll continue on. This is our second lab that we're going to spend on our special senses. And in this one, we're going to focus on the anatomy of the eye and how this is related to vision. So we're just going to continue to kind of review and put things together as we go forward. So this may be getting old at this point, but which cranial nerve is responsible for collecting our visual sensory information? So this is cranial nerve 2. Okay, the optic nerve. This is the one that's actually sending the information to our brain so that we are aware of what we're seeing. But we have 3 cranial nerves. These are not involved directly with vision, but they help our eye movements. So these are cranial nerve 3, 4, and 6. And do we remember the names of these cranial nerves? So cranial nerve 3 is the oculomotor nerve. 4 is abducens. And 6 is the trochlear nerve. So just remember, take a minute and make sure you remember those and that you can identify those on the brain where we would find those. Remember the optic nerve, cranial nerve 2 is that one that makes the optic chiasm, which is easier to identify because it makes that X. So make sure you review those. Now, one of the things we're going to be doing in identifying structures are identifying muscles. So these muscles are exactly the ones we're talking about that are innervated by cranial nerve 3, 4, and 6. So before we get to the models, I want to talk through the naming of these muscles because honestly, there's really not much to memorize as long as we understand our terms back from lessons 1 and 2. So we're focused on the term superior, the term inferior, the term medial, and the term lateral. Okay, now we're going to add 2 terms. Okay, one is rectus, and the other is oblique. Okay, so we can see some of these muscles are named rectus and some are named oblique. Rectus in Latin means straight. So the way that we look at it, this eyeball, okay, if you imagine basically the rectus muscles are going straight posteriorly, right, straight back, basically following the same direction as what we imagine our optic nerve leaving the back of the eye. So those are our straight muscles. So as long as we understand superior, right, means above, right? Inferior, below. Medial means toward the midline. And lateral would mean toward, away from the midline. So that would mean if we're talking about, so it tells us this is the right eye. So I'm not an artist, but this would be the person's nose, right here, and then there would be another eye on this side. So this would be the medial side of the body, closer to the nose. So we basically have north, south, east, and west, right? Rectus muscles. Superior, inferior. Medial is the side closer to the nose, right, toward the midline. And lateral is going to be further away from the midline. Now, we have 2 oblique muscles. So again, we see superior, so that's toward the top, right? Inferior, below, toward the bottom, or the bottom of the eye. And the oblique muscles are not going to go straight back. They're going to travel to the side. So we see this inferior oblique muscle, see it's crossing, right, toward the medial side. The superior oblique also is crossing over the side. Now, this little structure right here, where that superior oblique muscle is traveling through, is called the trochlea, like a little hook, if you will, or a little pulley. And that's why we have the trochlear nerve, because it innervates that muscle that goes through that little trochlea. All right, so we're going to identify some structures on these models. And one thing that I want to point out is the first thing you're going to want to do when you see a model is to identify what's medial and what's lateral based on whatever structures are present there. So in this model, what I'm going to use are the bone structures that tell me where the nose is. So this, you can see this little division here. This, okay, is the nasal, is the nasal bone. So that would be like the bridge of the nose, right? If you had glasses or something, it would sit right there. This bone here, of course, it's cut away. We don't see the whole bone, but this is the frontal bone. So remember we learned the frontal region early in the semester. That would be the bone that goes across sort of your forehead area. And then we have other bone structures. So our maxilla bone, and then over here to the side, this is called the zygomatic bone. So that one is lateral, right? Obviously nasal is going to be medial. So now that I know this direction is medial, that's going to help me to identify those muscles of the eye. So let's just check these off as we go. We have the lateral, the frontal bone, the nasal bone, the zygomatic bone, and the maxilla. Okay. Now let's go ahead and identify the muscles that we can see. So this muscle, let me change my colors. This muscle is not a rectus muscle, right? Because it's not going straight back. This one is an oblique and it's below the eye. So I know that's my inferior, right? This purple muscle here, that is my inferior oblique muscle. Okay. Now, I have a superior oblique muscle also, and we can see it crossing this direction right here, right? That's my superior oblique. Now, I also have my rectus muscles. Okay, so I have a superior rectus muscle. That's this one, right? That we can see right here. That would be going straight back, right? So that's my superior rectus. Let me change to a dark blue. And then this is the lateral side. So this muscle on the lateral side, that's my lateral rectus muscle. Then I have the muscle that's going to be on the medial side. Let's see. So this one, I don't see it very well, but I know it would be here. Okay. My medial rectus muscle. So we've taken care of those. Oh, the inferior rectus, we haven't drawn that one on yet. So that would be this one that we see here, right? That would go straight back. That's our inferior rectus. That's taking care of all the muscles that we need to identify. Now we have some other structures, though, that we haven't talked about yet. And the one that you're probably all familiar with is this interior hole, basically, that is the pupil, right? And that's the part that can constrict, right, and dilate based on the amount of light. And then the iris is also probably something that you're familiar with. This is the colored part, right? The ring that's around the pupil, the colored part of the eye. And it's the iris is made of smooth muscle. And so there's actually 2 layers of muscle in the iris, of smooth muscle. And it's that muscle, that smooth muscle of the iris, that can constrict, right, or dilate. And those muscles are actually called the pupillary dilator or the pupillary sphincter that are going to cause the pupil, right, to get larger or smaller. And in a future lesson, when we talk about the autonomic nervous system, there's a parasympathetic and a sympathetic arm. And it turns out that the parasympathetic arm of that division is responsible for the sphincter portion, right, when to constrict that pupil, whereas the sympathetic division is responsible for the dilation of that pupil. But anyway, the iris is made of smooth muscle. It's that the colored part of our eye. So some people have blue or green or brown. They can be different colors, right? Now, the last item I think on this that we're responsible for labeling is the sclera, okay? The sclera is all of the white part that you see, this connective tissue white part that you see around the outer part of the eyeball. Now we're looking at a little bit different view. So this is going to be the lateral view. So we're looking at this as if you were looking at someone right from the side, if they were facing straight ahead and you were looking at them from the side. And so again, we want to label some of these landmarks so that we can identify which muscles we're talking about. So this here, right, is going to be my frontal bone, that bone that it's cut away, but if it wasn't, it would continue across the forehead. Okay. And then this bone over here on the lateral side, sort of like by your cheek. This is the zygomatic bone. So now we have those two landmarks, so we know that which is lateral and which is medial. Now I want to show you something that we haven't identified yet on a model, and that is the optic nerve, okay, which is going to travel to the brain through cranial nerve 2, okay. This right here is our optic nerve, or cranial nerve 2. Now, the optic canal of the sphenoid bone, that is just basically this opening that is present there, right, that allows that optic nerve to travel through those bone structures. Now, I can see over here on this lateral side, this is my straight muscle, right, my rectus muscle. And since it's on the lateral side, I know that's my lateral rectus muscle. I can't see my inferior rectus muscle right under the eyeball, but I can see it extending backward. Maybe this view helps you to see better why these are called straight muscles. Now, the superior rectus has been cut away, so I can see a piece of this, right, superior rectus. If it were not cut away for the model, it would continue back, okay? So that's my superior rectus. Let me erase that out of our way, though. Now, I do see the oblique muscle. It has come around, and this is it, right? It has come from the side, and it's come around. We don't see the side part, but that is my superior oblique muscle. Now, all of the white part that we're seeing all around the eyeball, that's that connective tissue that's called the sclera. And then I believe we have identified everything we need to for this model. So each time you look at a model, the first thing we want to do is orient ourselves. So this tells us that we're looking at the superior view, which means you're looking down as if someone was sitting in a chair, right? And you could see through their skull down onto their eyeball. So this, we need to orient, we know we're looking down, but we need to orient ourselves which way is medial and which way is lateral. And the reason this is given here, the cribriform foramina of the ethmoid bone, even though we haven't covered bones quite yet, that's what this is right here. In olfaction, when we talk about olfaction, we talk about the olfactory nerves have to travel through this area, right, to get to the nasal cavity. So that means this, right, if this is where the nose is, this must be medial and this must be lateral. So that's one way that I can orient myself when I look at this diagram. The other giveaway for what's medial is if we look at the superior oblique muscles, they're going to run medially, right? So the direction of that is medial. So there's my superior oblique muscle. The optic nerve, right, is very visible in this model, cranial nerve 2. Again, we see this canal, right, that's formed by the bones. Now, we see the frontal bone, okay? Again, there's a cutaway. The medial rectus muscle. So if this is medial, right, then I'm looking for this muscle right here that I don't see very well, but I can see a little bit of that medial rectus muscle. Now, the lateral rectus muscle is much easier for me to see, right, on the lateral side. And I believe that that is all we need to identify of these structures. Okay, so this is an anterior view of the eye socket. And so the cornea is, so that's going to be this clear portion, right, that's at the very front of the eye. The cornea is clear connective tissue. And so basically that's the clear part, right, that you see in the front of the eye. Now, I want to point out this right here that's on the lateral side. So here's this superior oblique muscle going this direction. So this is medial, right? We just talked about that. That's the medial side. The other way that you can always orient yourself is the lacrimal glands are going to be on the lateral side. Okay. And the function of the lacrimal gland, when you cry, right, that's what's producing those tears for you. So they're helping to lubricate your eyes. Now, the inferior rectus muscle, you can see it just right here, right on the inferior side. We can identify that. The iris then is going to be deep to the cornea. That's going to be that colored part of the eye. We talked about the lacrimal gland. So the lateral rectus muscle, notice it has an asterisk saying, where would this be? You can't quite see it in the model. So once we've identified our lateral side, that's easy, right? I know my lateral rectus muscle would be on the lateral side, the side by the lacrimal gland. And my medial rectus muscle would be on the medial side, right? Extending straight back. Now the pupil, right, is the area in the middle that can change shape, that it can be dilated, or the sphincter can make it narrow. The sclera is all the white connective tissue part that we see. We've already identified this as the superior oblique muscle, right, that's going in the medial direction. And then we need to identify where the superior rectus muscle would be located. So it would be here, right, at the top. It would be heading straight back, right, that rectus muscle posteriorly. So this is a lateral view, and I can tell this is my lacrimal gland, right, that's on the lateral side. And so since this is the lateral side, I know that this, that's labeled number 20, let me change colors. This on the lateral side must be my lateral rectus muscle, right, extending straight back. The white is still the sclera, okay? And then I can see my superior rectus muscle at the top, okay? Get the superior sclera, lateral rectus, lacrimal gland. My inferior rectus muscle is going to be located down here, right? This is my inferior rectus muscle. Now we're looking from the opposite side. We're looking at the medial view. So this is this would represent my medial rectus muscle. Again, below would be the inferior, right? And above would be the superior rectus. And then I can see this oblique muscle right here. And since it's on the top side, I know that's the superior oblique muscle. Now, this is a little bit different model. So in this case, we're looking at the interior of the eye. So we're going to look at a little bit different structures. So the first thing that I want to point out is that we have several layers, right? So if we look, the most external layer, right, that's shown in white there, that's going to be the sclera. And it extends around, right, all the way around the eye. Now, this next pink colored layer right here that's deep to the sclera, okay, this is going to be the choroid. And then the layer that is colored yellow, that is the retina. Now, we've talked a little bit already about the sclera. We know that that's the connective tissue. It's going to be a tougher layer. The choroid we haven't talked about yet. So this is going to be the layer which we find a lot of blood vessels that will help to send nutrients and take waste away from the tissues in the eyes. And then the retina, this is where the business of vision is, right? The retina is the innermost layer, and this is where our rods and cones are going to be present. This is where the actual sensation where we detect light occurs. Now, you can see that toward the back of the eye, this is the optic nerve, okay, that's exiting to the brain. Oh, so that's cranial nerve 2. And right here in this area would be the optic disc. And that's because in that region, we don't have rods and cones because that's where the nerves from the retina are all coming together to exit as the cranial nerve 2 and go to the brain. So one other area that I want to point out. So we have rods and cones along the retina. We've talked about that. But there is a specific area that our eye works, that the lens works to focus our light or our vision toward the back of the retina, okay, about right here in this area. This is the macula lutea. So that's the area where the majority of our cone cells are going to be located. The cones are those responsible for our color vision, our very clear vision. So as you're watching this video or as you're reading your textbook, your eyes are focusing that light coming reflected off that into that area so that you can see it very clearly. We obviously have rods and cones in other areas, but that's the focus to help us have our clear vision right there in the macula lutea. So this is just another view of what we talked about, looking at it from a different perspective. I did want to point out we see those 3 layers, right? The outer layer, the sclera, then the choroid, and then the deepest or the most internal layer is the retina. And so we mentioned the macula lutea was the area, where we want to have our vision concentrated, right, for very clear vision. The fovea then is the very center part of that macula lutea. We see the optic nerve. I did want to point out that the lens is shown in this image. I don't think we had a lens in the last image. And the lens is where the light is focused, right? The light comes in, okay? And the lens is going to be what focuses it, okay, to where it needs to be to hit the retina. The lens is regulated, okay? It can be flattened or stretched or relaxed based on something called the ciliary body. So those are smooth muscles that change the shape of that lens. And those are connected to the lens by these suspensory ligaments. Okay. So this area here, it's not labeled, but this area here would be the ciliary bodies. They're going to help change the shape of that lens. So we see the cornea, right? The outer part, that clear part. Now, this part in red, right, is what's representing the colored part of the eye, the iris. Okay. So obviously that opening would be the pupil, right? The pupil is just the hole that that the iris makes. So we can constrict or dilate and make that pupil larger or smaller. Now let me clear this off for just a second because I want to point out something else that we haven't talked about yet, and that's about the kind of fluid that we find inside the eye. And as you're doing your cow eye dissection, you're going to find fluid when you dissect that eyeball. So in front of or anterior to the lens, okay, is something called aqueous humor. And aqueous humor is going to be thinner and more watery. Okay, so that's from the lens right to the cornea. That's going to be aqueous humor. Now, posterior to the lens, this is vitreous humor. And vitreous humor is going to be thicker because it has more proteins. So we've got 2 different fluids, right? And the lens is the separation between those 2 types of fluids. Okay, we have another example to look at, and there's a lot of labeling going on. But what I'm wanting you to see, the iris in this image looks much more like what we're used to seeing an iris look like, right? Green instead of red. And we can see the hole in that iris is the pupil, right? That's where light's going to enter, right? It enters through the pupil. And then it's going to be focused by the lens onto the retina. And you can see here, it's labeled this general area, right, is the macula lutea, and that very center piece, right, is the fovea. Now, the optic nerve is exiting. This area where we said you can call it a blind spot. It's where the receptors, the photoreceptors, the rods and the cones are not present. That's called the optic disc. So I want to point out to you, here's these suspensory ligaments, right, that we said are responsible for changing the shape of that lens so it focuses the light. And we see in this image, we see the ciliary body is labeled that is connected to those suspensory ligaments. And again, we see the chambers that have the aqueous humor that is in front of or anterior to the lens, and then the vitreous humor that is in behind the lens. And I promise this is our last model. We're almost finished. And this is looking at, if you could look in a microscopic image, but it's obviously an illustration of that image. But I want to start with, first of all, let's get our bearings. This is the sclera. Okay, so that outer connective tissue layer. And then we can see blood vessels, right, in this layer. So this must be the choroid, because that's where our blood vessels are going to be found. Okay. And then we have our area that's the retina. So all of this, right, all of that is our retina. Now, the other thing that we know about the retina is that it has 3 different layers of cells. So our rods and cones are actually going to be this layer here. And then this middle layer is a layer that are called bipolar neurons. And this top layer then, these are the ganglion cells. Now, if we think about, if you remember when we had our eye, so if this is the pupil, right, and we have the iris and we have the cornea, and that's not a very good eye, but if that's the eyeball, and this is the back of the eye, right, that we're looking at, the sclera, right, would be the outer layer, okay? So light has to come through the pupil, right, to the back. So that means is if we're following the direction of light, let me change to yellow. Light is going to come all the way through the ganglion cells, the bipolar cells, into the layer that has rods and cones, right? The rods and cones are the layer that are actually, they have the ability to detect or sense the light. So the light is coming in there and is being detected at the level of the rods and cones. But then the rods and cones, once they are activated, right? Once the light comes in, they convert that light energy into electrical energy. If the threshold is met, then that message will be sent to the bipolar neurons, right? Those bipolar neurons then are going to send an action potential or electrical potential to the ganglion cells. And eventually those are going to travel. Oh, let me change colors. So those then are going to travel out, right, through that optic nerve. So remember, we had that area in the back of the retina called the optic disc. So all of those nerves are going to travel out the retina toward the brain through that optic disc.